ערב טוב.
Good evening.
מבט ון ליר לדיון ציבורי הוא
The
פורום.
Van Leer Forum Mabat is a forum that wishes to service topics that we believe should stand on the agenda of the Israeli society. This evening, we would like to discuss the future of the past of Jerusalem and the link between archaeology, heritage, and politics. For this purpose, we joined our colleagues in Emek Shaveh Association, our partners in the preparation of this evening, to discuss the various options that lie before us when we discuss the question of how to manage the antiquity sites in every future political agreement. Every option bears with it political ramifications and opportunities of different kinds. Not all options are represented on this podium tonight, but they reverberate in the public and the appointed institutions. I wish to thank our colleagues in Emek Shaveh, and in particular Yonatan Mizrahi, Dr. Yonatan Mendel from the Van Leer Institute, Shulamit Laron, the head of the events in the Van Leer Institute, and her staff, Nissim, the interpreters, the distinguished panelists that agreed to come, and to you, distinguished audience, for finding the time at present and interest in the future of Jerusalem. I'm honored to call upon the archaeologist and the CEO of Emek Shaveh, Yonatan Mizrahi, to give his address. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As far as we're concerned, the discussion today is one that we have been considering and discussing for a long time. And the question is actually the question of the antiquities of Jerusalem. And as far as we're concerned, these are the ones that are constantly excavated in the archaeological sites, and some are the relics and those buildings that have been around for thousands of years. We, as a group of archaeologists, see the past, those relics, as a research field that not necessarily influences the past, but archaeology to us does not influence the past, rather the understanding of the past. But a study that is conducted today ultimately influences our life today as well as our future. Based on this concept, we learned that there is a need to discuss archaeology and the antiquities of Jerusalem and the way by which we understand them today and the way we see them in every social and political context in the framework of Jerusalem. As far as we're concerned, Jerusalem is ultimately a bone of contention, of political contention, and we understand it in the following way. When we talk about the future of Jerusalem, the past and the antiquities are part and parcel from any resolution. And I think that, just like I said earlier on, this is where this discussion stemmed from this exact need. And I would like to also thank, first of all, the Van Leer Institution, the Anat, and Shulamit, and the Van Leer staff that truly worked and labored for a long time to organize this conference. Obviously, the Emek Shaveh staff, mostly Anna Wider and Dana Herzberg, and obviously to all of you. I do hope that we're going to be finding this interesting and to have many, many questions that will provide us some food for thought for later on. Thank you. The first speaker is Professor Alona Nitzan Shiftan. Professor Nitzan Shiftan teaches history, theory and criticism of architecture in intercultural context, with an emphasis on architectural culture of post-Second World War. She focuses on the city of Jerusalem and modernisms, modernisms in Israel, and questions of nationalism, post-colonialism, historiography, cultural heritage, and globalization. She will discuss history, space, and politics, experiencing antiquities.
אוקיי. ערב טוב לכולם.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Van Leer, to Emek Shaveh, which recently is an organization I started to cooperate with, meet with, and mostly to Yoni, whom I could not refuse because I'm always amazed by how very little Jerusalemites know, Jerusalemites who care, know about the environment they so care about. And this is why I would like to talk a little bit to my own audience, even though I do not think that there are too many architects in the whole, about the role of architects and preservers in what Yoni described, and I totally agree with him, the modernization of the past. What I would like to talk about is the conceptualization of the relationship between antiquities and culture. And I would like to ask how architects are formulating values of political influence through space. And is it possible to see architectural preservation as having such a say? And I would like to prove that yes. And based on the understanding that that is truly so, I'm checking in research in general, and I'll just give you, flavors today, the questions of how the negotiation takes place regarding the status of antiquities through architecture, and how through this regional negotiation do we interpret the space and the assets of a city. The assets are important because we do not know if there's any national approach, but definitely these states have assets, and we're competing over those states through antiquities and the way by which we're actually giving spatial meaning to those antiquities. And the critical project is to expose the temporality of the bane of our existence, as our Prime Minister said in 1996, as a social, political, and cultural phenomenon, as our Prime Minister said when they opened the tunnels. I will start with the directions in which I work, and later on I'll get to those cases and those places that are really very dear to many of our hearts. Those connections between nation, location, and history, and the one that Ben-Gurion is in charge of that actually relates to that part. Archaeology is just a segment of modernism, of competition over the sources of culture, of the colonialist project, and it was constructed as a material trace of a modern existence. If we touch the matter, we truly touch the source. We actually touch the thing itself. And in the archaeological findings dug by the British in Jerusalem to emphasize the monotheistic culture, turned in Ben-Gurion's project a scientific proof to the existence of Judaism, the link that connects between the Jewish people and Zionism in Jerusalem. The unification of the city in 1967 allowed the unification of the metaphoric text with the concreteness of the Wailing Wall through the findings found around it. To do this, you had to detach the Wailing Wall from its Arab surrounding and to shape an alternative urban environment that is Jewish, a special context that would domesticate it as an emblem of Israeli Jewish culture. Because those actions are done by architects, this is the topic that I'm trying to examine, and this is what I would like to look further into. How is that relation created between matter from the past and the present? I think that we are very, thanks to many of the people sitting here, we know what the role of archaeology here is in that respect. And I would like to rather talk about preservation. In an article written in 1902 by Sreger, he talks about the subject of preservation as a value of the present, monuments and their interpretation as a present asset. And he says that this value does not stem from the relics of the past per se. These do not unfold any absolute truth that is above time. Quite the contrary, they depend on the interpretation of the modern subject. The status of those monuments, and that's very important because that brings you into my discipline. They're seen in the way they are interpreted, seen, and the treatment of them changes according to the demands of the present, its values and flavors. In other words, I'll show you how through architecture we're getting to a situation in which we have an imaginary participation. We can, through the space that we're in, through the antiquities that we find, we manage to generate an entire world of meaning. The examples that I'm going to give that belong to a more explicit study I elaborated in other places. For example, if we enter the Wailing Wall tunnels, we enter a space that looks like expound, very, very narrow. We enter it, we, sort of rub against it, and even though it is, it seems very old, but we know that all the services are there, and we know in the very little time that we spend there that this is the place. We're told that this is the place that, without knowing why, we'll just stand there and we'll realize that we're Jews. And this is why when I talk about this thing, and this is, for example, we look at the practice, the way by which people are operated, are activated, manipulated to experience the place. Whenever you go to the Wailing Wall tunnels, two people are standing on the two sides of the largest threshold. It's always a guided tour. We always know what we need to see and how we're supposed to experience it. And these are the modes by which monuments are presented and perceived with the senses and the awareness of the public at large. In other words, the way by which we approach, the way we go down through the tunnels, the type of lighting, the type of smell, all the sensual perception depends on the way by which the audience is exposed to the uniqueness of a monument and to the space that frames it. Preservers and architects are empowering the sensual experience that is raised in the meeting with those monuments by the informed design of the space that is exposed to the eye, the body, and the usage modes. That's very important. It's a significant difference to the perception that we are aware of and that we're familiar with that is important in and of itself of the entire critical discussion of archaeology. Archaeology is a science. We need the ethics of science. We need to obtain the information in principle. The minute I talk about the minute by which archaeologists have ended their work, at least in the first round of excavations, namely all the information is already obtained, and in principle one can cover the excavation, and this is how it's going to be preserved in the best way into the future. But the minute the digging is exposed, from the minute the archaeologists leave the areas, the preservers and the architects walk in. The Antiquities Authority have a large department of preservers today. This is a relatively new department, and they are and the archaeologists are going through in-service training on how to work. The way by which the audience is exposed, the way they learn about the site is only through the experience that is prepared by the preservers who decide how to preserve, what to reinforce, what to expose, what to disclose, where one should enter and where one should not enter. And the architects that organize the access road, the views, the exposure, and the way by which this place is designed. And by that, they empower a certain sensation. Now, in the Wailing Wall tunnels, we see the very empowered, strengthened experience of the rocks, and we read in the brochure that these rocks overlooked beyond time. They saw it all. They breathed war and peace and guaranteed revival. We know that these rocks, the material nature of these rocks, expresses or contains something that is, by the way, questionable in Judaism, what can be found in matter and what only hovers above it. Here we're talking about the experience of the matter itself as authentic, original matter, as something that contains divinity in it. And this brings us to holy sites as well. And this way we touch those, the essence actually of those sites. We touch the essence of life in a different way. And here again, I would like to talk about this very briefly. I talked about this slightly earlier at greater length. But if we talk about the Davidson Center that archaeologists have commissioned, the Antiquities Authority has changed for the time being, but that's a center that to begin with says, I do not touch the finding itself. I'm only being hosted in those palaces of the Umayyads, and I definitely take a look all the way down into earth. I would like to look at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the area itself, if you can see, those passages do not touch the archaeological matter. Intentionally, everything is disconnected. The modern matter is there. There's a lot of glass and steel. There's no attempt to change the atmosphere, unlike the very intimate atmosphere of the Wailing Wall tunnels. Here, it's different. The architecture is related to the concept, and the concept says that there is a Herodian history, Byzantine history, as well as Umayyan history. In other words, each of those competitors have every one of those monotheistic religions have their own history, and we're merely managing it, and we're commissioning from the LA University the exact scientific models. Now, why is that so important, the whole idea of space? Because the social meanings and the political meanings that lie in the act of spatial frameworks as building a mindset and the horizon that we see ourselves in, a place that simultaneously has is embedded in something and is mirrored by something, giving form and order to a space and containing it in clear borders is a role in shaping the future. Hence, the work of architects and designers is a subject necessarily, we're talking about politics and antiquities, in the politics of social change. And we're in a situation in which antiquities mark social change. Hence, the environment that the architects imagine and create mediates structures and changes power relations. In other words, the framing work allows us to see ourselves in this structured world, to actually discipline our meaning in it. And the competition is indeed over our identity. Now, in order to do this, if I spoke earlier about topical things, then now we're talking about a space that is far greater, in which we are disciplining our own identity. We are working on the urban level, not on the municipal, on the topical level. When we move to the urban level, the municipal level, we take monuments from the past and we turn them into a natural presence that defines the meaning of the modern subject. And what we see here, and that's very important, because we generate a place that seems to us as if it was really there. How do we do this? It's a very, very charged place. We cannot build above ground. We are building underground. We are actually preparing a whole Jewish city under the existing city, and you can see the very same thing, the very same awareness, consciousness machines of the visitor centers that we saw earlier on, how they are deployed in a very, very large system. We saw the Davidson Center. We saw the beginning of the Wailing Wall tunnels that can be found here. The Strauss House, the Center for the Link of the Generations, or Yitzhak, is being constructed. The core house is a large center that had a large public discussion about, that was already approved in the various committees. The Davidson Center and the entire park is being discussed if Elad Association would take it under its wing or not. The place that I'm going to elaborate on, the Givati parking lot that the Kedem Center is discussing in the planning committees, and throughout the city of David, where the whole list of smaller centers all are interrelated in underground tunnels, one to the other. In other words, we're creating a space that ostensibly is very large. Ostensibly, it is exactly the way it was, only more organized and nurtured and clean, and we can experience it in a totally different way. The place I'll focus on is the entry to this area. It's the Givati parking lot. It's an excavation that is extremely, extremely massive, that archaeologists know, and they have instructed our students, and they can tell you so much more. But just look at the size, and this is the project that is now pending. Yesterday, the objections arrived. All that they undercut here is sort of scraping a bit from the top and from the side, but in principle, this is a project of the Elad NGO. It's a private area, 20 meters away from the old city walls in the national park. That's a violation of the law, so if you violate the law, you create a new law, and everything is okay. Now, what is the meaning of the national park? And I would like to talk about this and to see what we are actually violating. The national park is a British idea, the green belt around the Old City immediately in 1967, and this is a plan that was submitted in August 1967 to generate in the Ministry of the Interior that image around the Orientalist image of Jerusalem. And the idea was that to generate the beauty of Jerusalem is actually the foundation for all the Tadi Kolek invited from overseas, because that is the basis for cooperation, and beauty has a political role in that respect. That is the image. And a plan was conducted, a statutory plan. In other words, it's a plan that was designed to actually draw a law for the environs of Jerusalem and also the national park. We can see the park here within that broader plan of plan number 9. And I would like to show you within that plan, maybe to just give you a small example how such a plan or through this architectural work, you change the entire balance of the area. And I am relating only to those planning aspects, the architectural, the professional aspects, and I'm sure there are lawyers here who can talk about other topics, but I would like to relate to the professional aspect of it. We have here with us, and I believe we have here, Shira, are you here? Okay. And she wrote her master's degree about the national park around the walls, and she discovered that, as a matter of fact, what we had here was an extremely innovative thinking for that time that came from the person who is considered the father of GIS, and it actually managed to enact this law of the national park because they created an entire system of layers that managed to see the entire area, not as points, as separate parks or as separate perspectives, but rather as one system that can correspond. This is a system that was born for ecological reasons, to say that this is the agriculture, this is the the vegetation, and this is where the transportation here, and these are strata of different periods in history, and by actually stratification, they managed to create a system of parks that is a municipal system. It's a park within a city, and that's a very important point. Resulting from this kind of thinking, while all the plans for Jerusalem have been rejected, this plan was praised and received the accolade of everyone. At the moment, instead of having a municipal system that you can reach that is open-ended, that can relate to various parts of the city in a way that is more balanced, what we get to is a situation in which we have one entry point, and this plan is marketed to the Kedem Center as one point from which one experiences Jerusalem. In other words, you can talk about this as one point in which you enter into the underground Jerusalem. All the buses will get here. Every visitor would have a locker, because we're talking about a center of 16,600 square meters, and that's around the size of a campus of a college. And the whole gravity of this park, everyone would enter, they will be told what they're about to see, they will see presentations, audiovisual representations, etc. And as we can see from this point on, this is going to be the main junction that would lead you to the Wailing Wall, the Shiloach Pool, the Ophel, to various places, sometimes above ground and sometimes below ground, because gradually an entire city is being dug. Today, the Gichon spring is connected to the Wailing Wall compound. All the foundation for the heritage of the Wailing Wall is excavated under the Muslim quarter, and ultimately they will all link to the excavations in the city of David. And already now, and I'm sorry that I haven't actually given you a picture of the page, but you already have tourists who actually go underground and can sort of freely move from one place to another throughout this area. And I'm talking here about Kedem, the Foundation for the Heritage of the Wailing Wall, puts the entire Muslim quarter on scaffolds with the state-of-the-art technology. The place that I work in the Technion, is developing this technology. Now, what is the meaning of visitor centers? We're talking about a situation of in situ. It's not a situation in which we take antiquities like the Rockefeller and we present them, exhibit them. These are places that actually decipher and decode that place that we experience even before we experience it in any other way. Now, just see the illustration of how many visitors we have. Some of it, the chain of generations, the Davidson Visitor Center. The entire Davidson Center is one floor out of 7 of the Kedem Center, the Kedem Center that we discussed, the Ohel Yitzchak Visitor Center that is excavated very silently and connects to the Wailing Wall. Tunnels, earlier on they renovated the synagogue, and now they discovered a huge hole of Khan, where they're going to have another visitor center. And these are the preparations. You can see that this place is being worked on. I do not know if there are many sites in the world in which the work advances so quickly. They inject special silicone porcelain that can actually keep those arches up and to work on them to make them more rigid and stiff so that they can carry on digging. The budgets that are injected, really the sky is the limit. The core house that has been recently approved, and these are only a few of the visitor centers. In other words, gradually the entire antiquity area is going to be totally dictating a guided experience of who we are and what we see. And this is the system in its entirety. So a few things about the Kedem Center. I cannot help it, but I have to show you the sizes, because surprisingly very few people relatively know the whole matter, and I think that we should actually get organized for another objection to be presented. This is the fabric. These are the sizes of the houses in Silouan. I'm going to go over this very quickly because I'm getting a signal. The time is running. Just look at the sizes. See the size of this in comparison with what is happening here, how it looks from a distance. The height in comparison with the walls, its presence in the street, be very close to it. This is a simulation. We're building above the antiquities. We're connecting a parking lot. Buses will be able to arrive very easily. This is how the original plan looks, and we can see that the plans change. Do they change substantially? There's a great pride that this plan was connected to the additional plan, and then there's going to be another one, and then they're going to sort of shrink them all together in one plan. This is an area that a private NGO holds. It's an area that the state is relegating, and we're talking about land that is owned by that NGO. This is how it looks from. It's marketed as a bunch of balconies from the less flattering perspective. You can see that this subterranean building is not exactly subterranean, and we're talking about good architecture of a leading architect, etc. Okay? So if we try to sort of close the discussion, in 1981, the old city was declared a World Heritage Site. In 1982, it was declared as a World Heritage Site in danger. That's a shameful state for every country. It can only be preserved for the Taliban. And since then, our relations with UNESCO thrived. We are interested in maintaining good relations with them. So we have to ask ourselves a few questions. And I think, and intentionally, I do not want to emphasize the issue of Elad NGO, because we're missing the key point here. We have a project, and the project is modernization of the past. It uses advanced technologies and advanced means of production. It creates an entire city. We're not building above ground, we're building underground. If you enter the Wailing Wall Tunnel, so they are digging another floor under the existing floor. There's a construction project at large sizes. And when we have above ground building, we have the law for building and construction that should regulate the planning and the construction to defend the public against the ability of means of production, real estate, etc. We do not have the same thing about what is happening underground, because the antiquities law is expropriating these areas from the law of planning and construction. The minute you're declared as antiquities site, no longer does the law apply. So the Antiquities Authority understood itself that we have projects amounting to a totally different scope. So it set up a large department of preservation preservation, but we do not have a law that determines this. UNESCO that declares in conventions what the laws of preservation are is not statutory. None of its convention is statutory. And the question is, how can we come and say that this is the property of the public and the public has to see to it? The public should regulate it. The public cannot give 20 meters away from the wall, 16,600 square meters to be managed by a private NGO. How do we preserve this management in the hands of the public? And how do we legislate laws that can actually reapply the preservation as a part of the law of planning and construction? We have a situation here in which we have given away, just like we give the capital holders our matters to be dealt with, here we have other people of capital who do exactly the same thing. We all want to expose the antiquities, and they have the finance to do that, and they will do it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the riveting presentation. Our next speaker is Professor Rafi Greenberg, archaeologist, professor at the Tel Aviv University, active in Emek Shaveh organization between 2005 and 2009. He was a part of a group of Israeli architects and Palestinian ones that formulated a policy paper about the future of the archaeological finding and the archaeological excavations in a future peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. He'll talk about the urgent need in rebooting the archaeology of Jerusalem. Thank you very much. I'll put up the presentation. Well, my presentation perhaps would sound to you as if it's a bit shallow, or it touches the surface of things in comparison with what archaeologists do. But because I only have 20 minutes, it's the only thing I can do. You will need to believe me that these are things that I've been thinking about for many, many years, and I can obviously elaborate, and I do intend to elaborate in other occasions. My presentation is going to discuss, or is going to address, or is going to raise a number of provocative arguments with respect to the Israeli archaeology and the historical basin of Jerusalem. And I would like to argue, first of all, that the scientific achievements of these archaeologies actually build towers more than we know. I'll argue that archaeology went astray. It's no longer independent archaeology. I mean in the historical basin of Jerusalem. And I will propose a proposal to restart or reboot or to recalculate your route. It depends on which device you're using more. I'll review very quickly the first stage, just in a nutshell. The first stage in the project, the Israeli archaeological project in Jerusalem after 1967. Here we can see part of the national project that started in 1968 by the senior architects of Israel, Mazar, Avigad, and later on Igal Shiloh. Beside them, by the way, in the Wailing Wall tunnels, the Ministry of Religions excavated illegally the Wailing Wall tunnels and cleared away findings that nobody knows where they were buried. Perhaps we can set up a mapping plant only with what they cleared away from those tunnels. The biggest one was the Wailing Wall excavation in the southern part of Binyamin Lazar that spanned over areas of dozens of dunams. It's hard to believe the size of the area that was excavated there. A large enterprise was that of excavations under the Jewish quarter that was more topical. It spanned over a large area, but not in a contiguous way. And the third enterprise was, of course, the excavations of the city of David, and I will relate to this later on. I said that proposals of the scientific proposals or propositions of those excavations or the scientific achievements are limited, and this would come as a surprise. Everyone knows, of course, this iconic description that we can see here that reinstated the temple and built the bridge of the Robinson Arch, etc., etc. And indeed, on the popular level and on the level of the general public's low knowledge, the way by which tour guides can explain about Jerusalem, there were many, many innovations and novelties. But in place where archaeology is truly measured as science, this is not in tour guides' explanations, but rather in scientific publications, in various reports written. And indeed, today, after how many? 45 years? We'll soon get to 50 years since the excavation started. Mazar's diggings were published in 2 small volumes. Some of the material went on fire and it's gone. Some of them is in a legal dispute between the heirs of the excavation, and it would never be seen by the public. Avigan excavations are in good hands of the Jewish quarter, and they publish every 2 or 3 years a new volume, a massive volume about those excavations. So we now have 7 of them, and half of the work has been completed. In the excavations of the city of David, there are 7 volumes, and we still have a very important part, perhaps the most well-known of the excavation, that has not been published yet. In other words, during 30 or 40 years, even before we've managed to digest the work of the preliminary Israeli excavations in the Historic Basin, already we enter a certain, wave of new diggings that we have gotten to today. So here we can, I can show you the map. I don't know if we truly need the map here, but I'll talk about a special case. Because our time is extremely limited, I chose the representative case, and I go back to the crime scene of the Givati parking lot. And the reason because of which I focus in this case is because here we're talking about a very clean matter, clean archaeological matter. There's nothing religious about this. There's no control of the rabbinical institutes or anything. What happened since 1995? Since 1995, archaeology, the academic archaeology, has left the Historic Basin of Jerusalem, and archaeology has been handed over to bodies whose main motive is religious and political. And I'm talking about the Waqf, about Temple Mount, that cleared away a large quantity of material, and the Ministry of Religions in the Wailing Wall compound that manages all the findings in the Wailing Wall tunnels and the compound, and the Elad NGO that manages almost all the excavations in the area of the city of David. Most of this activity, except for the Waqf, is done through the Israeli Antiquities Authorities as a subcontractor. So the Givati excavation, that was a vacant place. There was no need neither to excavate it or to build on it. It was just a parking lot, asphalt, just a thin layer. There were plantations. There was some sort of a garden there with a few terraces, and you could do whatever you wanted, anything you could think of. And lo and behold, what they did was an excavation at such a large scope. In order to see the kind of way the Antiquities Authorities went in the past 20 years, years, since 1995, and this is the turning point indeed. I'll show you a document that was written in 1997 of the Attorney General or the legal advisor of the Antiquities Authority, Yoram Barcela, and he writes a very long letter to the legal advisor that the very clear-cut position of the Antiquities Authorities is that it's essential to preserve the city of David, and one could not carry out any construction works in the area of city of David. You should only excavate archaeological excavations and preservation works. And we cannot compare the attitude of the world to this site to the attitude that the world has to Acropolis, for example. Later on, there's an explanation why this area cannot be handed over to Elad NGO, because in 1992, the Elad NGO initiated an urban plan according to which above the lands of the state in the city of David, there was supposed to be built at least 200 apartments. No doubt that if this plan had been executed, the future of the city of David would have been in peril, and it would have been destroyed. As part of its position, the Antiquities Authorities objected to this plan, and it continues to object to any activity done by the NGO, the Elad NGO in the city of David. Not very long after, we find that the will has reversed its direction, and here in minutes from 2006, and these documents are a part of a pile of hundreds of documents. This is our small archaeolix. In documents that we received officially from the Antiquities Authority that we're going to publish in full in the summer, we can see that the attitude changed. And here, already in the middle of the project, in the middle of the excavations that we saw earlier, that are done in order to research an underground city so that they will be able to build inside that city. If you want to study, if you want to build a house today, don't try to obtain a construction construction permit first. No, start your digging, and already you'll have places or room for the foundation. So the Antiquities Authority writes the following. Following is the chain of the project management for the Givati parking lot. The Elad NGOs, headed by Rafi Ben Basat, the Moriah Company, and the Antiquities Authorities are subcontractors in carrying out archaeological excavations. And this is why I add this half a sentence, because according to David Be'eri, you don't need a permit. David Be'eri is my telephone pal to whom you phone in the middle of a meeting to know what is allowed and what is prohibited in the Givati parking lot. So the Antiquities Authorities has changed its role and volunteered to be the subcontractor, and that's how it defines itself, to be a subcontractor. I'm not sure you can see this. I'll have to read it to you. How is that actually taking place on a daily basis, so that you understand that this status of a subcontractor bears liability? You're not just a subcontractor. You have labor relations of specific kind. So this is a chain of emails between the head of the excavation in the Givati parking lot, Doron Ben-Ami is his name, and a woman who is in charge within the Elad NGO, whose name is Oya. Doron, happy holidays. Do not understand the decision to stop working for 3 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Isn't it clear that we're pressured to finish the work? Doron answers, even though I do not owe any explanations, I can update you that I decided that these 3 days would not be working days, etc., etc. And her answer, you do not owe me explanations? Well, your bosses in the Antiquities Authorities did not know about this vacation either, and so on and so forth. What is this style? I don't owe you explanations. This is the line that you take now and in the Elad NGO. I need to understand. and I'm skipping a bit, these people that you owe no explanation to, there's no reason why we should celebrate 6 years of excavations. A few years too many, years in which these people to whom you owe no explanation see to your salary. And this is the style. This bullying style is well known to all those who do anything that the owners do not like. This is an archaeologist who is running the excavation. He's got no control over his own timetable. The control is in the hands of the commissioner. And moreover, the Antiquities Authority is turning into part and parcel of the construction plan, the one that it objected to at the beginning of the way. It's not only a subcontractor, it's an enthusiastic partner to the planning, and it's not a part of the mandate of the Antiquities Authorities. It has vast powers, but planning and constructions are not included in those mandates. So the Shuka Dorfman concludes a discussion, one of many, in which many of the stakeholders participated, and he says that what seems to us as okay in the plan and what does not seem as okay, and that we want to advance this plan, and I won't read further. The direction is positive, and we can approve certain plans under the stipulations that would be included in the general plan, and so on and so forth. So what has the Antiquities Authority done? It turned into accomplice, into a partner in constructing this large area of 16,000 square meters. In it, there are 6,000 meters of rooms and buildings and you name it, ladies and gentlemen. The entire presentation of archaeology in the Israel Museum spans over 4,000 meters. So it's not something negligible. It's a huge building. The entire renovation they did in Israel Museum was on 7,000 meters. This is going to be a grand enterprise of exceptional magnitude. It doesn't seem very big from the air, but when you stand on the ground, it seems something huge and a lot more significant. So what takes place here is that the Antiquities Authorities is working against itself. It finds itself in a place that it never expected to be present in. And I'm now going to show you, Alona talked about the preservation branch or department or administration, whichever name it is given, it is constantly being upgraded. So the preservation administration determines as a part of its policy to respect the existence of contradictory values and sites, to encourage the continuity of the traditional usage of the site, to present the historical truth, to encourage the participation of communities with different cultural affiliation. It refers from the Antiquities website to the UNESCO Convention that talks about things like preservation of archaeological heritage by every legal means, and he reads in English. Everything is nice words. These are highfalutin words, and in particular, the attitude toward the local communities. How the Antiquities Authority is interpreting the attitude to the local community, namely the village of Silouan, where the Givati parking lot is. Well, it's the following way. Here in response of John Seligman, who used to be the head of the Jerusalem district. And it says people will turn here. In the appeal to the Supreme Court, they will refer to the Iconos conventions that talk about the environment of the community. And these conventions do not relate to sharing the things with the public, says John, based on the knowledge that he's one of those who worded the convention. He knows what he's saying. They relate to archaeology in the environment of indigenous people. Indigenous people like the Indians in North America or the Maori in New Zealand and the Aboriginals in Australia. It's not the case in this case because the owners are the entrepreneurs, the developers, and the financing elements of this area. Half a sentence is missing here. This is different because we're talking about Arabs, of course. floors. That is something inherent. It hasn't been explicitly said, but we have to understand that. But even the fact that we have a private developer, that too is the zeitgeist. That's also of the signs of the modern era, because the private developer is protected by the basic laws, and the Antiquities Authority cannot possibly struggle against them. He who pays the piper calls the tune. So if we are to conclude the situation of the archaeology that is done in the historic basin today, then we find the following things: not meeting standards that were determined, by the way, by the antiquities laws concerning proper scientific publication that has to be done within 10 years after the excavation, using digging methods that do not meet the scientific standards. If you get phone calls every other day from the owners, then you shorten the way using different methods that we cannot possibly enter today. These methods are not exactly the ones that operate according to the antiquities authorities, or as is the norm in the Israeli academic milieu. It's very important that they do away with their archaeology inventory that is not unlimited. It is limited. It has a limit. It has an end. If we carry on digging in such a pace, nothing would remain. And that's in a way that runs counter to the ironclad rule of our archaeology, that the archaeological evidence is an unrenewable resource, and we must manage it wisely and prudently, and to think about the future generations. Eroding the commitment to the historic truth and the equality of the value of every period that would be expressed in the policy of the antiquities authorities. We could not enter this, but you understand that if antiquities are being managed by religious organizations, political organizations, there is an erosion in the commitment to the historic basins, driving away the local Palestinian community from being partners in the understanding of the site, closing the spring, the Gihon spring, that was the spring of the village. It is now closed to the residents of the village. They can no longer approach it. They undermine the human rights of the citizens. They lower the value of the assets and the property of those residents, and they want to sever their authentic connection to the place, because the history of Silwan is removed from what is being presented in this site, as if the Silwan village has no history in the place itself. And I probably took more of the time that was given here. So what can we do, and where should we go? So I honestly think, and that would perhaps sound as extreme, but I do think that we need to stop digging in the historic basin of Jerusalem, to simply put a stop to this, to push the button that stops things, and to stop before we continue further. And when we decide to continue, we should continue in a whole new track. And that track, that should be one that we should imagine to be one that is shared by all the residents of Jerusalem and all the stakeholders, all those interested in the history of Jerusalem. Just imagine to yourselves not to be Israeli Jews, but rather Palestinians, residents of Silwan and the Old City, as tourists, as members of other religious communities. Just try to think how you would present Jerusalem, how you would dig Jerusalem, how would such an excavation, Israeli-Palestinian or Jewish, Muslim, Christian excavation look like? Something of this style. We have to reformulate new archaeological questions. No message in the methods and the archaeological thinking came out of the archaeology of Jerusalem simply because it lags behind in publication so much. In other words, archaeology is chasing events here, and it's no academic research per se that is original in any way. And we must enter, while the archaeological study is conducted, into a dialogue with the residents, and we must have ethnographic thinking about the place of archaeology in the Jerusalemite life. How archaeology is conducted in Jerusalem. Who are the people involved? How do they look? What is their visibility in the ground and their sites? It's a part of the fabric of life. It's a totally different archaeological thinking that archaeologists are not experienced in it. And to be experienced, they have to stop, to take some time out, and to restart the archaeology of Jerusalem again. Thank you very much.
תודה רבה,
Thank
רפי.
you very much, Rafi.
והדובר
And the
הבא
next
שלנו
speaker
הוא דוקטור אוסאמה
is
חמדאן.
Dr. Osama Hamdan.
דוקטור חמדאן הוא
Dr. Hamdan is an architect specializing in preservation, teaching preservation in Al-Quds University, and manages Mosaica Center in Jericho. Since 1994, he managed and instructed a number of projects of preservation of heritage sites in the Palestinian territories as an advisor to the Antiquities Department of the Palestinians in UNESCO, financed by international entities. Today, he will talk about the management of cultural heritage, ownership, and local communities.
Heritage, ownership, and local community. Thank you very much. Welcome.
Shalom. I will talk in English. I am sorry that I cannot talk in Hebrew, but it doesn't mean that my English is perfect, but we will try. I cannot see my presentation. Here. No, yes. Sorry. I think the topic of this lecture is difficult to deal with. All of us know how much the situation is complicated in Jerusalem and are aware of the importance of its history. Most of these present here work or are interested in cultural heritage in general, and likely in Jerusalem in particular. Doesn't work. Here it's working. It needs time. Maybe. I also think that most of us believe that cultural heritage gives benefits to local population, both in educational, cultural, economical terms, and reminds us from where we are coming and who we are now and what we want to be in the future. It means that cultural heritage helps us to understand our identity and the continuation of our civilization, and to define it in a defined place and I think that this topic interests us as heritage professionals to achieve our professional goal in the best way. I also think that the topic interests politicians and decision makers in order to find a solution that take into account our presence. Jerusalem and its region were lived since millennium. Accumulation of civilization gives its shape of today. Each civilization is based on previous one, and each country come to learn and live for the others. We see, for example, the Dome of the Rock. How much its plan and mosaic work are similar to previous monuments. It means that we share same and mixed roots. The case of Jerusalem is an example of a policy concerning the management and enhancement of historical and holy sites that tends to consider only the historical phase that interests one culture and one religion, which is at the moment the dominant, not taking into consideration other culture and historical periods, leads to the abandonment and neglecting of parts of the history of the city. We should not underestimate the role of cultural heritage, its impacts in several areas and at several levels. In its positive aspects, it can bring communities together. In its negative aspects, it can divide them and causes tragic consequences. Some of our institutions in the Old City of Jerusalem in recent time have carried out various projects to maintain its architectural properties, spending considerable amount of money, which the main goal of to help the local community to stay and defend their. Note that still there are large numbers of architectural properties that needs to be preserved and rehabilitated, and that needs a lot of efforts and money. In East Jerusalem, the work of Palestinians is focused in architectural conservation and housing rehabilitation. Some awareness activities are also carried out, but they are few and poor. Excavations are not carried out to avoid any request of permission to the Israeli Department of Antiquities. Palestinian works in the conservation of cultural heritage in Jerusalem, in spite of all the difficulties and obstacles they face, now know how to take action on a technical level, more and less. Sometimes their intervention have positive effects on the identity and history of the asset, and other cases they have negative influence. Often, this intervention does not respect the principles and the philosophy of the heritage conservation. There are several examples of which we are ashamed to say we have work in the conservation because it was being badly done. And some of these values of the heritage have been lost. Sometimes the Israeli Department of Antiquities stop Palestinian works in the Old City, saying that we are destroying the archaeology. Maybe sometimes they are right, other times they are not. In fact, they are occupying authority and the power is all in their hands. We find all excuses and reasons to forget the main point. But I believe that we can do better in spite of the situation that we are going through, and I think that knowledge, science, professionals can be our weapon to define our identity. The issue of the value is an important topic in the process of the role of local communities, especially in the field of cultural heritage, because of the relationship between the asset and the local community. The values of the asset could be spiritual or religious, artistic or historical, social or cultural, educational, and maybe can be symbolic or belonging to the identity. The relationship of the local community with these values can be found in the social and cultural structure of the community, which is affected by political and economic factors that are always moving. The cultural heritage must be needs of the concerned community and their feelings, but at the same time must meet the methodology and philosophy of professional working in the field of cultural heritage. And in Jerusalem, this is not always the case. The communities living in specific area and in a specific time naturally find the appropriate method to exist with the remains of the past and try to explain their past and to outline their future. For this reason, the process of conservation becomes not only a matter of purely technical process of saving the past, but also an element for present and the future. And all of us as local communities are responsible for this. The role of local communities become a major role. Therefore, I think that activities in cultural heritage could be an opportunity for community participation in this process. And I mean not working for the local community, but sharing the process to build trust and mutual respect. And currently, there is no. The use of exclusively history in the Israel policy creates fears in the local Arab population because it becomes a reason of territorial control, building and land confiscation. On the contrary, participation can create a sense of shared responsibility in the conservation of cultural heritage. Palestine today is its nascent stage, and this period of transition involves rapid economic development and intensive construction in the attempt to build the country. It is a dangerous phase for the Palestinian cultural properties and history. And there is a grave risk that the importance and value of these properties will be underestimated, and it may be destroyed and lost forever, especially in the absence of binding legal regulation that could provide recourse to it. After 20 years since 1994, the situation of cultural heritage under the control of the Palestinians in the territories under their responsibilities is suffering. Neglected, degraded, lack of national cultural heritage law, lack of master plans, bad management and bad lack of cooperation among central and other institutions, lack of specialist academic institutions and research centers, looting and traffic of antiquities, division of the territory, Israeli colonization in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the wall and closures of the territory. What we can do for Jerusalem? In the current situation, the management of cultural heritage in Jerusalem is difficult. The east part of the city, according to international law, it's occupied territory and must return sooner or later under Palestinian control. Consequently, cultural heritage will be managed by Palestinians, taking into consideration the importance of Jerusalem and the complexity of its nature and present Palestinian capacity. Maybe it would be useful to ask some serious help to accompany the Palestinian institutions that deal with cultural heritage in building capacity and management for certain period. The future management of cultural heritage in Jerusalem, with its presence of various religions and identities, cannot depend on one institution, but it is necessary to establish an integrated program that become a dynamic tool based on a knowledge and updated studies. It is crucial to establish an environment of cooperation and sharing of duties and responsibilities, and a real and effective participation among institutions located in Jerusalem, such as religious authorities, educational institutions, NGOs, private sector, etc., etc., who should play an active role in raising awareness for a wider participation of the local community and especially young population. The development of integrated plan based on dialogue and constructive debate could facilitate an institutionally political framework open to the participation of all representatives of the local community. Palestinian institutions lack professional specialist staff who are essential in the process of successful activities in the field of cultural heritage related to development for future management of cultural heritage in Jerusalem. Therefore, serious training activity are needed to train staff able to create methods and new and innovative ways for a development compatible with the conservation. And here comes the role of the universities and institute specialists in training, and also to encourage the research activities. It is necessary to create and reinforce the capacity of the local community, taking into consideration that it is a long and difficult process, full of obstacles, but it is the only way that can give us hopes and experience. Only a community which is strong, conscious of the importance of his role in management policies of cultural heritage, help us to reach our goals, to preserve our cultural heritage, and also link us to our roots, waiting for the storm to pass. Thank you very much.
טוב, אחרון חביב.
Okay, and last but not least,
אני מבקשת להזמין את
I'd like to call upon Miron Rapaport
לדבר על עבר נפרד.
to talk about a separate past, a joint present. Miron is a journalist, an editor, and a translator, one of the founders of an Israeli-Palestinian group that is called Two State, One Homeland, that deals with a political solution that is based on the recognition that the past of the land has meaning to both nations. In his past as a journalist, and even after, he was extensively involved in the political use of archaeology in Silwan and in the old city of Jerusalem. Please.
תודה רבה.
Thank you very much.
טוב, אני באתי בלי מצגת.
Well, I came without any PowerPoint presentation, and relative to the other speakers, I'm no academic, and I do not have this ability to present things in such an academic way. I will still would like to start on a personal note. I listened to what was said, especially Rafi and also Alona at the beginning, and I started writing about these topics about, 8 years ago, I believe. And the worst things that one could even conceive has actually happened. I remember a meeting with John Seligman. He was the head of the Jerusalem district back then in the Antiquities Authorities, that I exposed that ostensibly the Oel Yitzchak excavation, a synagogue that is located on the Guy Road, as it were, that actually the idea is to connect this to the excavations of the Wailing Wall. He almost threw an ashtray at me. How come you're a liar? You understand nothing. You're just talking nonsense, etc., etc. And everything happened. Everything. This whole plan actually is building an underground Jerusalem, and it all really came true. things that you actually, it's a lesson in conspiracy. In other words, you as a journalist believe that there are no conspiracies, but then you see before you something that looks like a conspiracy, and ultimately it materializes and it becomes a conspiracy, and the feeling is very unpleasant. I would like to, quite naturally, I believe that all the speakers related. Well, first of all, my angle is more a political one, and it's one that looks more into the future. We're dealing with, all the speakers dealt with the present as well as the past, and I would like to talk a bit about the future, but I'll start with the past first. Quite naturally, I believe that all the speakers related to the old city or the historic basin, and that is clear. It's clearly the most sensitive place, and it's under occupation, as we heard. And there's a legal issue there. You know, the excavations there are legally disputed. With respect to the international community, it's an occupied area. But I would like to focus on those places which are within Jerusalem, that is called the western side of Jerusalem. Jerusalem that is in the hands of the State of Israel since 1948. Jerusalem that where there's no controversy when it comes to the ownership, and we know that it's in the hands of the State of Israel. And I'd like to start by reading a letter that was written by a person called Chaim Ze'ev Hirschberg. I don't know if you know him, but he was a Jew who came from Poland and studied Middle Eastern studies back in Europe. He studied Islam and Arabic. He came here and he became inter alia professor in Bar Ilan, and for many, many years was the manager of the Department for Religious Matters of the Muslims and the Jews in the Ministry of Religions. A letter that he sends, the photo is not that clear, but it seems like the 11th of August, 1951, to the minister, Bechor Shitrit, the Minister of Police, the legendary one who served in his position for nearly 20 years. Himself, by the way, just a side comment, was born in Tiberias, a city that was a Jewish Arab city to a certain extent, and was destroyed in 1948 in one of the worst archaeological crimes done by Israel immediately after its occupation, even before the establishment of the State of Israel, before the official declaration of state. Ben Gurion was forced to go and stop the explosion. They exploded the entire city of 2,000 years and more the minute they seized it, and what has remained of Tiberias is nearly nothing because they kept exploding the city. He was born there, and I heard testimonies of Palestinians who were his neighbors. So he wrote to Bechor Shitrit. Topic, the cemetery of Mamila, that's in 1951, right? Sir, because of the value of life, this is a concept that I learned now. It's an Aramaic concept that means the sanctity of the dead, rather, not the life, even though they use the word life, but it's the life of the dead, as it were, because of the sanctity of the dead, the respect of those who are still living. I see this as my duty to approach you, sir, to ask you to think about the matters of the Mamila Cemetery and help us in putting some order in place. This is the third and the fourth time that we are fixing, with very little means that we have, the fence that surrounds the area and organize guarding the area that became a meeting place to card games and other foul activities during the weekdays, and in particular during Saturday. In addition to this, the place is used for a very cheap quarry for bricks. Obviously, these deeds are not hidden from people who pass by, and every day we get applications from governmental ministries and municipal entities, journalists and foreign elements, and just citizens who approach us on this. This is back in 1951. There's no doubt in the mind of that manager of the Department of the Muslims and Druze that Mamilla is a cemetery that needs to be preserved. It is very clear to him. And there are various complaints about what is being done there the minute those violations are carried out. And I will not go into every fine detail of this very lengthy story of Mamilla Cemetery, but in an article that Professor Itzhak Reitel, in which he writes about helping the entrepreneurs of Mamilla to build the attempt to build the Museum of Tolerance. It hasn't yet been built. It is there that the letter appears of the mayor of Jerusalem in 1958, who writes to, again, somebody in the Ministry of Religions in Haifa, Sudeh Shukri, and he writes to him that there is an intention to hold an event on Independence Day in 1958. Never ever was there an intention to turn the Mamilla Cemetery into an amusement park. He writes to him, this he writes in 1958. In 1964, the sanctity of the place is lifted by the Qadi of Jaffa, and that was the most powerful thing, the argument that was used by the developers. And later on, with respect to certain parts of the cemetery, parts of it is what you know. A small segment is a park in which certain graves were preserved. And over another part of that cemetery, a parking lot was built in the Agron house itself. And the entrepreneurs, the developers of the Tolerance Museum, wished to build a museum there. So they want to build this museum. And I'm now quoting from a letter. The minute the work starts, the Islamic movement is mobilized against this construction, and it approaches in an appeal to the Supreme Court, and in the request to stop that construction because this is a holy place. And I'm going to read short quotes from the response of the Antiquities Authority, the first one, and then it corrected its response. However, the first one to the Supreme Court. The area that is known as the Mamilla compound is declared antiquities site since the British mandate from 1994 and in 1944, and then it was redeclared in 1964. It is known as a well-known burial site in Jerusalem. The cemetery of Mamilla has been known since the Crusaders' time as the place of the burial of the higher clergy, and certain findings were preserved, including a whole grave that is south to the area where it's now excavated. In the Ayyubi period, the cemetery was used by the Muslim community in Jerusalem. The Mamilla cemetery was used as one of the most important Muslim cemeteries from the Ayyubi period until the end of the 19th century, and he carries on and reports about the results of the investigation that archaeologist Gidon Soleimani conducted on behalf of the Antiquities Authority. The results indicate a very condensed burial in 5 layers, one on top of the other, which indicates a very long burial times and continuous use of the cemetery over hundreds of years. It is organized in a perfect way that indicates a central administration of the cemetery over many generations. The importance of the investigation, it's all in a letter of of the Antiquities Authority to the Supreme Court. The importance of the excavation is great and is not questioned. A systemic excavation teaches about the burial methods over hundreds of years. The study of the excavation rituals, the types of graves, teaches about the population of Jerusalem from the 12th century AD and on, 900 years, okay? The excavation within the cemetery serves as a well-known research field in archaeology around the world. You can mention many such excavations from similar periods to this one. So that's a letter, an official letter of the excavation authorities. So it's very clear to everyone in the Ministry of Religions from the 1950s and the head of the Antiquities Authority that this is indeed a cemetery, a very ancient one at that, that has been used for at least 800 years, or even more, 900 years, has been serving as the main cemetery of Jerusalem. And in those excavations, later on the Antiquities Authorities corrected its declaration and presented something that is very close to lies concerning the number of graves that were found. Only in the excavation site they found and removed 1,000 skeletons. And this is truly a huge cemetery, graveyard. So this is what the judges wrote in their verdict in 2008 when they decided to reject the petition of the Islamic movement. And I will no longer enter the embarrassing question. There was a discussion, a hearing of the Supreme Court in the Islamic Sharia, if the cemetery has been expropriated or not. I believe that the judges of the Supreme Court would not have discussed matters of Jewish law. They would have handed it over to religious law. But three judges, Prokacha, Arbel, and Cheshin, found it appropriate to discuss the Islamic religious law and to determine that indeed the sanctity of the cemetery has been lifted. So this is one of the key arguments. It was worded in the following way by the justices. We're talking about relics of ancient graves that are 300 to 400 years old. And these documents that were submitted by the Antiquities Authorities are not correct. We're talking about the 12th century and on. So my calculation says 900 years, no 400. This is a site that during years has been hidden from the eye, buried underground, that was not known and was not familiar to the public and the members of this ethnic group, and did not serve as any place of any emotional affinity, neither to the collective or the private individual. It was not seen as being a part of the cemetery. This is a community which did not have any connection to this particular site over many hundreds of years. So this, Dr. Hamdan spoke here about the weakness of the Palestinian archaeology, and we are talking about the Israeli archaeology, the organized archaeology, the Antiquities Authority, the Supreme Court, that is working and discussing at the highest possible level. And the Supreme Court, this Supreme Court, is ignoring, totally ignoring. And I'm just setting aside the historical connection as a heritage site, perhaps the most important one, or one of the important ones in the western side of the city, a cemetery of 1,000 years, and it totally destroys or allows its total destruction, and I believe it's a cultural crime. It allows it because it prefers the Jewish discourse to the Muslim Palestinian discourse in an absolute way, even though all evidence laid before it shows that this is a place of historic meaning, of grand scale, and has been known for hundreds of years. What do I wish to say by that? I'm just jumping into politics from this.
אין לי פה מצגת, אז אני לא
I
אוכל
do not have a PowerPoint presentation, so I won't be able to show it to you. But according to
הסכם ג'נבה,
the Geneva
שהוא
Accord,
הדבר היחידי שאנחנו
which is the only thing that we know about a geographical division,
ההצעה הכי משוכללת
or
שיש,
the
אני
most, sort of perfected proposal for a borderline in Jerusalem, according to the Geneva proposal, that borderline
קו הגבול בין ישראל לפלסטין,
between Israel and Palestine.
אולי הייתי יכול להעלות אחת המפות,
I could perhaps show you one of the maps. The borderline between Israel and Palestine is going to be delineated in such a way that the Jewish quarter would be in the hands of Israel under Israel's sovereignty, and the three other quarters of the old city would be under Palestinian sovereignty, and the borderline would be delineated according to a line that leaves the Eshbot gate all the way to the Mount of Zion gate.
לקו הזה,
From east of this line,
אופל, כל החפירות,
and that includes the Ophel, so it's from the Dung Gate to the Mount of Zion Gate, all the area that is outside of the walls, all the excavations that were done since that large Operation Silwan, the city of David, all this is going to be under full Palestinian sovereignty. So what is the attention given to this in the Geneva
שאין מחלוקת
proposal with respect to the heritage?
גזמה ואיום
Even if it was exaggerated with artificial means of the Jewish heritage beyond the Green Line, there's no reference given to this topic, absolutely no reference. There are various statements in the Jerusalem chapter that says the following: the parties acknowledge the religious and spiritual and cultural and universal importance of Jerusalem and it being a holy place to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, recognizing the commitment to preserve the sanctity of the city. The only thing that touches matters of archaeology is Temple Mount, and for a good reason. In Temple Mount, it says in one of the articles, in view of the sanctity of the compound and the unique meaning to the Jewish people, sovereignty in the Temple Mount has to be Palestinian, right? The religious and cultural meaning to the Jewish people, there would be no construction or excavations unless they're approved by the two parties. Maintenance procedures and urgent repair work will be determined by the international group after consulting with the parties. With respect to the general old city, general commenters said the parties would operate in accordance with the regulations of the universal assets of UNESCO. The old city is a registered site, and registering sites is a decision of the state. The state is the one that determines which sites would be registered by UNESCO. It is the one approaching UNESCO in the request to register sites. So I believe there are, some 12 such sites which are registered in Israel, which are UNESCO sites. Yes, Jordan handed it over to. We cannot hear the comment from the audience. I'm sorry. It's true. That's very true. That's very true. So the declared sites today are Masada, the White City of Tel Aviv, Tel Megiddo, Tel Chatzor, Tel Beersheva, the Neanderthal caves in the Carmel, the Baha'i Garden. There is also a request for another 20 sites. Out of them, there's one that can be called a Muslim-Palestinian one, the White Mosque in Ramle. All the others are sites that are identified with the Zionist movement and the Jewish heritage. What am I saying by that? I'm saying, actually, that if the state of Israel, the sovereign state of Israel in its own sovereign state, not the occupied area of 1967, in its own sovereign state, if it destroyed in such a way those different sites, and I do not have time to talk about, there are many, many sites, even within Jerusalem, like the Kamaria, near the Histadrut house, and many others, it neglects them in a criminal way. But if it destroyed a site like Mamila, it means that I think that we cannot trust civilized countries as civilized as they are, and the State of Israel is a civilized country, despite the fact that Rafi described the Antiquities Authority's conduct. I don't want to be subject to libel suits, but it behaves improperly. Despite this civilized nature, it preferred one narrative to another. And if we are to separate the area to two separate states and two separate sovereignties, ostensibly Israel on the western side and Palestine on the eastern side. It's not exactly east, some of it is to the north, but in those parts of the Arab neighborhoods, then we will be able to bring about a situation in which what has been done in Mamila would be done in Silwan by the State of Palestine, and very justly, because to them, why not build over the city of David their Muslim Museum of Tolerance and destroy all that Jewish heritage in place? Why not? If we did this, they can do it. And this takes me back to the political initiative that I'm involved in. The political initiative says the following. First of all, there's no agreement that would not acknowledge the tangible connection of the two nations to the entire area, the tangible connection. And there will be no agreement in which the management of this territory would not be in joint hands. The entire management, not only what has been conquered in 1967, but the entire territory between the sea and the Jordan River. The culture is shared. It's not shared. It was done in the same place. That's what I mean, corrects himself the speaker. The layers or the places are either one next to the other or one on top of the other. Hence, every agreement between us must be an agreement in which, there are agreements that are interstate agreements. And our concept talks about the unification between Israel and Palestine in that respect. Something similar to the EU, joint institutions that decide over these matters. A matter like the holy sites or historic sites have to be managed jointly by both sides. To a certain extent, we have to expropriate the sovereignty from the hands of state and to delegate it to joint entities, because it is the only way to preserve this culture. Thank you.
תודה רבה, ואני מבקשת לפתוח את הדיון.
Very much, and I would like to open the discussion. I would like to ask the speakers to introduce themselves and to speak very briefly, because it seems like we have many questions. So please. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, but if the speakers do not talk to the mic, we cannot interpret. I would like to relate mostly to Rafi's presentation and to the last speaker's presentation, Miron. And I would like to stem from a point of view of an archaeologist, not a political person. And I heard so many political aspects in all that has been said here. There's no doubt in my mind that the problem stems from the Antiquities Authority. The Antiquities Authority is a regulator. It is a body, a state organization that is in charge of preserving the antiquities of the state. I do not suspect the archaeologist of the Antiquities Authority that there is some conspiracy here against this culture or that religion or that nationality. No, it does not come from the archaeologists. The key problem is that archaeology, as it is done today, is based or conditioned on money, and the most money still, sort of, the organization that needs money most is the Antiquities Authority. It needs to get its money from the developers, from Elad, from the Ministry of Housing, every organization that would be willing to pay for excavations. There's no government funding, and this is where the problem starts, not this political argument or another. That's the way I understand it. So if we have to restart it, then it's not only to restart the archaeology of Jerusalem, it's to restart the entire system, the entire archaeological system of the State of Israel that has to be revisited in a way that it won't be based on money of developers or any other entity. Regretfully, the university that Rafi comes from, the Tel Aviv University, was extremely active in that field, and it excavated in Ramila the cemetery that has been described here. It received so much money, it had no problem with that. It excavated and still excavates in Jerusalem in the Holy Basin as a subcontractor of the Antiquities Authority, and it in and of itself is a subcontractor of Elad and other bodies. So if we talk about a restart, and here I agree, we simply need to restart it all anew. And the Antiquities Authority, and again I'm saying I do not suspect archaeologists, the system is based in such a way, it's built in such a way that it needs the money, and this money is a corrupting money. That's as simple as that. Thank you. Everything is clear? Okay. So if that is so, we will... Yes, please. Just please take the mic. Thank you. My name is Chava. I did a study that is engaged in the national park around Jerusalem. There are two aspects that must be added to what is being said, and I'd be very happy to hear the opinion of the speakers on this matter. First of all, I think that Alona pointed at the underground city that is turning into an alternative city to the above-ground city with a totally different meaning and an existence that is above time, as it were. The Kedem compound and all that is connected to the Kedem compound creates an above-ground city that has a role. Even if you do not see the antiquities in some of those sites, they have a major part in creation the various meanings on the ground. In other words, archaeology, Rafi talked about the fact that archaeology is sometimes a pretext. It's a pretext not just for construction, but for the creation of a different space that is a standalone space with this connection of one building to another and the creation of a new space. Much has been said about religious matters and national matters, and the subjugation of archaeology to religious and national ends. And not only the presence of Elad, but the meaning created by Elad, what it imbues into the archaeological buildings, are exactly the connection between the religious and the national, and a certain message that these things cannot be actually severed, and one cannot fight against this. Unlike a message where the religious element is hidden. The religious element creates something that publicly makes it very difficult to struggle against it. Please, sir.
My
name is Gary Newman, and I'm not an archaeologist. I'm just a citizen who lives in Jerusalem. I arrived in 1968 to Israel, so you can still hear my accent. I dare make a comment or ask a question. concerning the hotel that is called Waldorf Astoria today. And I was told once during the British Mandate that a hotel was built there by a developer, an Arab developer, and a Jewish developer, and it was supposed to be a hotel there. And this is where the War of Independence took place, and after that, it turned into a public building. It was the ministry. Oh, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. But today, it is a hotel. What I heard is that some of those buildings are built over what has left from a Muslim cemetery. In other words, a part of the Mamila cemetery. There was no objection of the Waqf during that time because one of the developers was a Muslim. The Waqf was the developer. If you wish to comment, I'll give you a chance to do this, but allow him to finish first. I'm not versed with the details, but it is a fact that when it's convenient for someone to object to someone, they object. And when it's convenient to advance something else or a different end, they do that too. So I'm simply making a comment here. I know that perhaps it's only a rumor, but perhaps there's some truth in that too. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Do you wish to comment? Okay. So just wait for the mic to arrive. Sir, please pass the microphone further. My name is Tzipi Ron, and I would like to correct and say that the developer of the building of the hotel, there was the Palace Hotel there, and he was the Mufti of Jerusalem and the Waqf, and indeed they did discover graves there, and the skeletons actually were taken in the middle of the night in order to be able to keep building, and we know this as part of the memoirs of those builders. I'd like to ask why we don't have in the discussion organizations that are engaged, like Ikonos Israel, for example, that I have the honor of being a member of and chairperson of one of the committees, and other entities too. I think that in a discussion of this nature, and I still remember the doubts and hesitations that accompanied Israel joining the UN conventions of UNESCO because of the complexity for the registration of Israel and Jordan. Only in 1999 did Israel join the convention, and only after could various sites be declared. So why don't we give a voice to these people who do preservations in this discussion? Those who work on a voluntary basis or those who are getting paid. They do care about this, and they want we want to hear more opinions. We want to know more diverse attitudes. It seems like there's one sort of one-sided argument voiced in this discussion. And to remove any doubt, in my role as the head of the tolerance movement, we submitted a request to join the building of the Museum of Tolerance. The court rejected our request, and there were many people who objected to the building over that part of the Muslim cemetery. Another part is preserved quite well, as much as possible, despite the years which have passed. So please be more accurate and obviously give room for opinions that are different, of people who do care, for them to hear that other traditions are being respected. There are those in Israel, there are those in Jerusalem too. Thank you very much. We have many questions and many issues, but I think that the positions that we heard here were diverse, It wasn't anything unanimous. We have the option, perhaps the international option that you raised. We have the binational option. We have different options that came up. I heard many voices, but indeed there's one voice that was not heard. It's also diverse, as you yourself mentioned. And I already know what you wish to say, so I'll let you do it instead of me. We already have an answer to you, and then we'll go back to you. Miro, who must leave, so we will allow him to speak soon.
טוב, לי קוראים יוני מזרחי מעמק
Okay, my
שווה,
name is Yoni Mizrahi from עמק שווה,
ואני חלק
and
עמק
I'm a
שווה,
part
חלק מהארגון של הערב.
of the organization of this evening, of course. ICOMOS, for this matter, they argued that they have nothing to do with Jerusalem. It was an argument voiced by a number of key figures that we approached, the representatives of ICOMOS, and they refused to come as representatives. We think that ICOMOS should intervene in Jerusalem, but we have no say in that. We approach those who operate in Jerusalem, like the Authority for the Development of Jerusalem, a highly influential body over what is happening in Jerusalem. Some said that they would not come, and some did not even respond to our request. And we also approached other figures who work very closely, mostly archaeologists, who work with the authorities in Jerusalem, and they too decided not to arrive. Thank you. Okay, we approached people from the academe, and they too bear responsibility, as we heard. And we wanted them to present those other voices. I'm not that worried, even though you are right on the principal level, because all other voices are constantly heard in what they do. And still, the comment is well taken, and we made extreme efforts, but without much success. I'll hand over the floor to Miron, and then afterwards to you. Look, concerning the Antiquities Authority, perhaps Rafi will answer far better than myself. But with respect to Mamilla and the entire question, I do not go into the question whether we needed to build the Tolerance Museum, yes or no. I'm talking about the ruling that says that this place was not known, that this place was not familiar. The three justices of the Supreme Court say that they do not know this place to be one of any historical value, that they do not know it as a cemetery, despite the fact that it is known, has been known as a cemetery for 900 years. Whether the Mufti did take up a chunk of it or not, it really doesn't matter. I think that this is the destruction of a historic heritage, and it is being done with the consent of the Supreme Court. That's all I said. Please. I simply apologize for needing to rush. I thought it starts earlier, and I do apologize. It's impolite, but I must go. Thank you very much.
Sorry. I think I agree with my colleague that really for the cemetery of Mamilla, it's not a question of Muslim cemetery or something like this. I think Israel, that it's considered civil country and democratic country, that it must think that all the remnants of the past, it makes part of their history. It is the history of the territory. It's not just the history of Muslim and Christian or Jewish. It's make part of the history of this territory, and it must be conserved. Everything in the past, somebody he make a mistake, it doesn't mean that after 100 years we have to make the same mistakes or justify our works in the same. Not to talk about politica, but we know that we have to face that a lot of works was done in not in just cultural heritage, but especially in cultural heritage. We can say that it put Israel in difficult situation, and we must ready to be sincere with ourselves that to face this problem, that we cannot just cover ourselves behind just one finger. Thank you.
She's not speaking to the mic. We need the mic there. The microphone is not working somehow. Thank you. Thank you so much. Creation of an upper reality, not just an underground reality. This above ground reality is sort of ventilation holes for the underground reality. It's like pumps of air that pump all the way down relative to the activity that happens underground. At least for the time being, the activity above ground is more moderate, and it's true that it does make a difference, but much of the above ground activity is simply channeling and creating passages that say it's just like those guided tours, namely the Kadem Center has a street that connects directly from the Dung Gate to the City of David. Instead of creating a system, it creates one clear route in it. But the amazing thing that takes place, that is always amazing, to what extent is it not present in the eyes of the president? You do have the Muslim quarter that is on scaffolds. The fact that there is a construction there, I show my students for architecture and say, look at the constructions. It's the cutting edge construction. As far as materials engineering, it's the cutting edge. Things are truly at an order of magnitude, and it's done in such a clandestine way that it's hard to believe. So it's true that things are happening above ground, but what happens underground is much more serious. I would like to say a word about your comment, Sipi. I think that there is something that turns us, I don't know how to put it in a delicate way, but it's not effective. I'm talking about the fact that the political debate and the criticism of the official politics of left and right and territories and the the criticism, the blatant criticism leveled at the Elad NGO, which is important, of course. It is right, but not necessarily smart, because we have to talk about civil matters of a very blatant violation of values, which are values that the international communities has agreed upon, that Israel has agreed upon, and signed these conventions. And this whole matter that we're actually talking about UNESCO as being a hater of the state of Israel, we're only damaging ourselves. Instead of creating a major lever through UNESCO, we're actually running against ourselves. So if we set the official politics aside, we still witness par excellence professional problem here, and we have to highlight that, because when we only work on the political, official, territorial direction, the right-wing people come and say, well, they hate us. But no, this is not the problem. The problem lies in the very essence of those professions that we're in charge of. So we have to be a lot smarter in our struggle, is what I maintain. Okay, with respect to the first statements concerning the dependency of the Antiquities Authority on developers and money, undoubtedly that is true, and this has been haunting us since the establishment of the Antiquities Authority. It isn't our topic tonight, but it's a very complex question concerning how do we sever this connection. Obviously, a part of this is making a certain separation between the role of the authority as a regulator and the role of the authority as an excavator or an excavating body. Because what happens is that the authority declares the need to excavate, and then it excavates. And we know, and we're going to publish the dozens of millions of shekels that were injected through the Antiquities Authority to Elad and back into the Antiquities Authority. And this is the life that keeps it going. And to a large extent, it's government money. There's a prevalent mistake that it's all philanthropical money and oligarchs and various, evangelists and unknown anonymous people. To a large extent, it's not true. This is taxpayers' money, and this is what does the work. So you cannot just, attach it all to those surreal activities done by those imaginative people. This is state conduct that is backed by the Parks Authority, the municipality, wherever you look. Obviously, the broader topic is indeed to be discussed separately, of how to actually maintain archaeology without any dependency on money, if there is at all such a thing. With respect to the underground city that has been extensively discussed, I would like to emphasize that it's perhaps a cutting-edge archaeology and also tourism, but it's actually creating very bad archaeology. What is actually done horizontally underground is the wrong kind of archaeology. And in this underground city, it's an imaginary city where the method and the system is that of the 19th century, invented by Charles Warren and his friends who worked with him and after him. They dug tunnels and caves and created an underground topography of Jerusalem through those tunnels. This creation of tunnels allowed them to tailor-make a story together that had no connection to the genuine history of Jerusalem, because they could not date the different components, and they attributed components according to the appearance of the stone. Even today, when you enter that hall, the marvelous Mamlukian hall, and they tell you about that generation chain, they create a certain distortion and they hide the history of Jerusalem. And this underground city is, as a matter of fact, an imaginary city, a city that is attempting to create a Jerusalem in the image of what we would like to see in Jerusalem, or we would like to dream about Jerusalem. But clearly, in an archaeological way, what we see here is a very, very problematic act. With respect to the Palace Hotel, Miron has given the answer to that, and I can only second what he says, and also Osama. We're not going to take the negative examples that keep happening all the time. Developers are perhaps the worst threat to the antiquities, so the archaeologists are united and unanimous in their fear of this endless development, but development must take place, and this is why we are in a constant dialogue. All those who are interested in heritage should be in dialogue with developers. It's not a simple one, and it crosses communities. It's not that all entrepreneurs are on one side and all the protectors are on the other, not at all. And myself and Osama have so much in common in our attitude toward the past. Okay, I do hope that we'll be able to hold a discussion in the future about archaeological sites, not as crime scenes almost, but rather talk about those archaeological sites as ones of entrepreneurship in the positive sense of the word. Those sites where there is discussion of ownership, of various exhibits of cultural heritage, and places where Palestinians as well as Jews will be able to cooperate and collaborate in different ways. I wish to thank you all for the comments, for the presentations, the extremely, extremely interesting presentations. Thank you to you all, and a good evening.